So we have this cultural habit, I think, of treating finished media like it just, materialized out of thin air.
Oh, totally. Like it just dropped from the sky.
Right. You log onto YouTube or Spotify or whatever, and there it is. You see the moody album cover, the perfectly calibrated audio mix, the whole aesthetic, and it feels so complete that you just assume it was born that way.
Yeah, you don't see the sweat. You definitely don't see the scaffolding.
Exactly. We almost never get to see the blueprint of how someone actually goes about, like, engineering a really raw, ugly human emotion into a digital artifact, let alone one designed to connect with a total stranger.
Which is such a shame, honestly,
Mhm.
because that illusion of effortless art, it kind of obscures the most fascinating part of modern digital
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah, the actual mechanics of it.
Right. Translating an isolated internal crisis into a shared community experience,
Mm.
that is a highly rigorous process.
Yeah.
It's part psychology, part audio engineering, and increasingly it's part algorithmic strategy.
And that intersection, that exact crossing point, is exactly what we're tearing apart today. So, welcome to episode 2 of our special series, Dark Pop Ledger.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a heavy one.
It really is. Today's deep dive is titled Dissecting the Void, the Making of Blind to the Game. And before we even look at the materials, I want to draw a very hard line regarding the creator behind Heartscript Studios,
Okay, lay it out.
because they are the architect of the track we are exploring today. And we need to be clear, this songwriter does not write poetry.
Hmm. I think we need to define what you mean by that because, someone looking at a lyric sheet might automatically default to evaluating its poetry.
Right, right. And that's the wrong framework entirely. Like poetry, at least in the traditional academic sense, it implies a level of emotional detachment.
Yeah, the classic Wordsworth idea, emotion recollected in tranquility.
Exactly. A poet polishes words, they obsess over meter, they package the pain for an audience's intellectual consumption. The lyrics in Blind to the Game aren't processed like that.
No, not at all.
These are just raw, volatile feelings. The ultimate mission of the Heartscript Studios channel isn't to dazzle anyone with clever literary devices. The goal is to carve out a highly specific, functional safe space in the digital void.
A functional safe space. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's about putting a frequency of pain out there so someone else can tune in and realize they aren't carrying that specific weight alone.
And if the goal is functional survival rather than, like, literary acclaim, the traditional rules of songwriting have to bend.
They totally go out the window.
Right. You aren't structuring a song to get radio play. You are structuring a soundscape to mirror a psychological state. So the pacing, the instrumentation, the lyrical repetition, they all serve the emotional truth rather than, a conventional pop chorus, verse chorus template.
Which makes our source material for today incredibly unusual. I mean, we don't have a slick PR one sheet. We don't have a glossy interview with the creator.
Thank God for that,
Yeah.
honestly.
Right. Instead, we have a highly specific dual-layered stack of sources. On one side, we have the complete lyrical text of Blind to the Game, but this is the crazy part. It's integrated with the creator's detailed back-end musical production cues.
Which is so rare to see.
So rare. We are essentially reading the stage directions for the audio arrangement alongside the words.
And having that sonic architecture laid out right next to the text, it gives us a literal map of how the lyricist intends to manipulate the listener's nervous system.
Manipulate in a good way, yeah.
Right.
And on the other side of our source stack, we have something even more revealing. We have the raw, real-time, back-end YouTube analytics from the official music video's release over its first 48 hours.
We are staring directly at the creator's dashboard.
Literally. So we get to see the intention, and then we get to see the cold, hard data of how that intention is surviving in the algorithmic wild.
It's the difference between guessing if a song works and mathematically proving it. I mean, we can map the emotional cues directly to viewer retention graphs and traffic sources.
So the central question for this deep dive is twofold. First, how does a lyricist successfully translate the paralyzing toxic reality of heartbreak into the specific mechanics of a dark pop soundscape?
And second, how does the back-end data actually validate that this raw emotion is forging a genuine connection in this, like, increasingly noisy digital landscape?
Let's jump into that first part, establishing the environment.
Yeah, the answer to the first part really requires looking at how the track sets its initial tone. If we look at the very first line of the source text before a single word is sung, we get a production cue. It just says, atmospheric intro, cold synth pads.
Cold synth pads. I mean, not a warm acoustic strum, right? Not a driving, energetic drum beat to hook the listener. It's deliberately cold.
And the lyrics immediately ground us in that temperature. Verse 1 starts with, "When you were there, my whole world would freeze. If I hadn't loved you, tell me what else could I do?"
The imagery of the world freezing, I mean, it's common enough in love songs, but paired with that production cue, it's not just a metaphor. It feels almost clinical.
Because it is clinical.
Wait, how so?
Well, when we talk about the human response to intense emotional trauma or just overwhelming heartbreak, the cultural conversation usually stops at the fight or flight mechanism.
Right, the adrenaline rush.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We imagine heartbreak is this highly active, chaotic state. Screaming matches, throwing things, running away in tears. But neurologically, there is a third, far more debilitating response governed by the dorsal vagal complex in our nervous system.
Okay.
And that is the freeze response.
Ah, the deer in the headlights phenomenon. But I've always found that analogy a bit simplistic, Is it really just about being startled?
No, it's a profound biological override. The freeze response occurs when the brain calculates that the threat, or in this case, the overwhelming emotional weight of the person they love, is so massive that both fighting and fleeing are impossible.
So your body just gives up.
The nervous system literally shuts down the body's active defenses to minimize damage. You are trapped in your own physiology. So when the production notes call for cold synth pads, the songwriter is using sound design to replicate that exact neurological shutdown.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because the cold synth typically has a really slow attack time. It lacks the organic vibrato of a stringed instrument. It sounds static, endless, and unyielding. It is the sonic embodiment of absolute powerlessness.
So the audio arrangement is essentially forcing the listener into a simulated dorsal vagal state. Like the music literally locks you in place.
Exactly.
And then we hit these lines that explore the dissonance of being stuck in that state. Let me read this. The lyrics say, "Every time I saw you, my universe just slipped away. If my voice had never trembled standing before you, my feelings were one thing, but my words would always change."
That disconnect between internal certainty and external betrayal is fascinating. The feelings are static, but the words are entirely compromised.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like experiencing emotional vertigo.
Emotional vertigo. I like that.
Yeah, it's a breakdown in the human interface. Think about how a computer acts when the processor is overloaded by a massive program. The internal hard drive has all the correct files, right? But when it tries to display them on the monitor, the screen glitches, it freezes, or it just outputs total gibberish.
That is a perfect analogy.
The sheer gravity of the other person is overloading the lyricist's system. They know their own emotional truth, but the fear of the outcome literally scrambles the vocal output in real time.
And the musical arrangement escalates to match that internal processor overload. As we move from verse 1 into the pre-chorus, the production cue shifts from the static, cold synth pads to something else. It says, ticking clock percussion, bass swells.
A ticking clock is such a specific, anxiety-inducing choice. It moves the track from a passive freeze into active dread.
It introduces the concept of impending consequence. The paralysis hasn't broken, but the awareness of time passing while paralyzed creates this suffocating pressure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The lyrics in the pre-chorus lock into this escalating panic. They go, "If my heart had not feared loving you, what would it have done? It beat only with your name. But the fear of losing you shook my very soul."
So the heartbeat literally synchronizes with the ticking clock percussion. The dread isn't external anymore. It's living inside the ribcage.
Exactly.
Now, setting up this incredibly specific, suffocating, dark pop atmosphere is one thing, but seeing how a real audience reacts to it is where this deep dive gets, frankly, really complicated. Let's pull up the data stack.
The YouTube performance metrics. This is the moment the artistic intention collides with the algorithmic reality.
Okay, I'm looking at the back-end screenshots provided in our sources, and I have to be honest, the numbers are microscopic.
They are small.
Over the first 48 hours, the video generated 237 impressions. It has a 5.1% click-through rate, and that has resulted in a grand total of 19 views. 19. I'll push back on our whole premise here for a second. We are doing an extensive deep dive on a track that has 19 views. In an era where a video is considered an absolute failure if it doesn't hit 100,000 views in an hour, can we really draw any meaningful conclusions about community building from a sample size this astronomically small?
I completely understand the skepticism. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to recalibrate what success means in this specific context.
Okay, sell me on it.
If this were a massive pop star trying to chart on Billboard, Sure, 19 views would be a statistical error.
Mhm.
But remember the baseline mission we established at the start, creating a safe space for raw, shared pain.
Yeah.
In grassroots community building, especially within hyper-niche emotional genres like dark pop, the quality and the source of the interaction matter far more than the raw volume. When we break down the traffic sources map, those 19 views start to tell a highly sophisticated story.
All right, let's dissect the traffic. How are these 19 people actually finding this track?
The primary driver, at 47.4%, is YouTube's browse features. This means the platform's algorithm is actively deciding to place this video on users' homepages.
Interesting.
And another 10.5% is coming from YouTube search. And those search terms are split exactly 50-50 between dark pop and official music video.
So the creator's metadata strategy is working. They aren't relying on luck. They've actually fed the algorithm the correct tags, titles, and descriptions.
But it goes deeper than just using the right tags.
Huh.
Algorithms don't just read words anymore. They analyze behavioral clusters.
Like watch history.
Exactly. The dashboard shows a section for content suggesting you. Basically, what videos people were watching right before YouTube recommended blind to the game.
Yep.
And one of the top referring titles is a video called Devotion.
Devotion. That's not a genre tag. That's a thematic concept.
Exactly. The machine learning model has evaluated the audio, the metadata, and the initial viewer behavior, and it has correctly identified that this track belongs in a cluster of content dealing with intense, borderline, obsessive emotional attachment.
Oh, wow.
The algorithm is essentially saying, if you were in the psychological state to consume content about devotion, you need to hear this track. The system is successfully mapping human limerence.
Limerence being that involuntary state of intense romantic infatuation and obsession. Okay, so the algorithm is acting as an emotional matchmaker. But what about the external traffic? Because 21.1% of these views are coming from outside of YouTube entirely.
And this is the exact data point that counters your skepticism about the 19 views.
Let's hear it.
The external breakdown is highly specific. 50% from hostingyorsite.com and 25% from WhatsApp.
Let's focus on WhatsApp for a second. That isn't a public broadcasting platform like X or TikTok. You don't post a WhatsApp message to go viral.
No, it's a closed-loop, peer-to-peer messaging service.
Right. It is the digital equivalent of sliding a mixtape across a table to a friend. So a WhatsApp share means someone clicked on this track, listened to this suffocating arrangement about the paralysis of heartbreak, and it resonated so deeply that they copied the link, opened a private chat, and directly sent it to someone else.
Yeah.
They essentially said, this is the exact frequency of my pain, or this is what you're dealing with right now. That is a high-friction, deeply intimate action.
Extremely intimate.
So, okay, I concede the point. Here's where it gets really interesting. 1 million passive scrolls on TikTok might mean absolutely nothing, but a WhatsApp share is a deliberate emotional transfer. Those aren't just views. Those are active participants stepping into the safe space. 19 views might seem small to a giant label, but in the context of creating a safe haven for shared pain, those are 19 individuals who felt seen today.
Perfectly said. But, getting them to click the link and step into the void is only half the battle. The defining metric for any digital creator is retention.
Right. Once they click the thumbnail and step into the void, do they actually stay?
And looking at the audience retention graph, the average view duration is 1 minute and 41 seconds, which is 46.4% of the video's total runtime.
46% retention on YouTube is actually really solid. Retaining nearly half your audience into the 2-minute mark of a slow-building, emotionally heavy track is exceptionally difficult.
Oh, it's incredibly hard. Modern digital consumption is defined by the 3-second rule. If you don't hook them instantly, they swipe. To hold them for 1 minute and 41 seconds means the atmospheric tension established by the ticking clock is fundamentally working.
So what happens at that 1:41 mark that serves as the payoff? The data says they stay, leading perfectly into the track's heavy midsection.
Yeah, we hit the midpoint climax. As the track moves into the chorus in verse 2, the production notes demand. Heavy electronic beat drops, dark pop climax, followed immediately by a driving bass line, rhythmic and aggressive.
Oh, wow. So a total shift.
Exactly. The suffocating static paralysis of the opening completely shatters into this immersive, chaotic energy.
The storm finally breaks. The freeze response fails, and the panic just takes over. And the lyrics in this chaotic section are exploring a very specific type of disorientation. Let's look at this. The lyricist writes, "I was innocent, unaware, blind to where love was leading me. didn't know its games, it took me time to see how twisted its paths can be.
The contrast between the innocent, unaware starting point and the twisted paths of the reality is a core trope of dark pop, but it's executed here with brutal efficiency.
I really want to break down that concept of twisted paths because it's not just about being lost.
No, there's intent there.
Right. When someone manipulates a relationship or when an emotional dynamic becomes toxic, the confusion isn't an accident. It's a feature of the environment. It's the difference between getting lost in a dense forest, which is just an act of nature, and getting lost in a hedge maze, which was deliberately designed by an architect to confuse and trap you.
That's a great distinction.
It's like wandering into a maze convinced it's just a community garden. The lyricists realized they weren't just wandering, they were being played in a game they were completely blind to.
And the psychological toll of realizing you are trapped in someone else's maze is the complete erosion of your own identity. The aggressive, driving bass line in the production notes mirrors the frantic searching described in the next lines. Listen to this. I lost myself near love so completely that I forgot how to breathe, chasing the hope of you. You never came, and I lost myself too.
You never came, and I lost myself too. The tragedy there isn't just abandonment. The tragedy is consumption. The driving bass line and the aggressive rhythm in this verse, they perfectly represent that chaotic realization of being lost. The lyricists poured so much of their internal hard drive into maintaining the connection, into hoping the other person would arrive, that their own core operating system was basically overwritten.
It is a radical subversion of the traditional pop music narrative.
How so?
Well, mainstream pop constantly reinforces the idea that romantic love completes you, that finding your other half makes you whole.
Right, Jerry Maguire stuff, you complete me.
Exactly. This lyricist is arguing the exact opposite. This specific type of intense devotion doesn't complete the self, it consumes the self. The search for the beloved results in total psychological bankruptcy.
Which leads to this devastating line. Now it feels like my life will pass, searching only for me. They aren't looking for the person who abandoned them anymore. They're just trying to find the fragments of the person they used to be before the maze.
And that profound sense of isolation, that realization that the self has been fundamentally lost, is what triggers the most drastic structural shift in the entire song. We arrive at the bridge.
The Bridge of Poison. Let's look at the production cue for the bridge because it represents a massive pivot. It reads, music stops, vocal isolation, then sudden massive cinematic buildup.
Stopping the music completely is an incredibly aggressive production choice. Up until this exact second, the listener has been carried by the heavy electronic beats and the driving bass line.
It's basically sensory overload.
Right, and the instrumentation acts as a sensory buffer. When you suddenly mute all of that and isolate the vocal, it violently violates the listener's auditory expectation.
It feels like the floor dropping out. You are just in free fall. You go from this chaotic, driving energy to absolute suffocating silence with nothing left but the human voice.
It forces an uncomfortable level of intimacy. You cannot hide behind the beat anymore. And it is in this stark, isolated void that the lyricist delivers the thematic thesis of the entire track.
Oh, this line.
They all say true love never dies, but no one ever tells you that it kills.
Okay, that is a massive line. They are taking the most ubiquitous, culturally ingrained cliche imaginable, true love never dies, and just weaponizing it.
What's fascinating here is how the lyricist violently subverts the greatest pop culture cliché of all time. By utilizing vocal isolation here, the creator removes all instrumental armor, forcing the listener to hear the raw, unpolished pain before the epic orchestral synths crash in. The phrase "true love never dies" is traditionally meant to offer comfort. It implies that genuine connection transcends time, distance, and even death. It's the bedrock of Western romantic idealism.
Right, right. But the songwriter recognizes the inherent horror in that permanence. By appending that it kills, they completely invert the meaning. If true love never dies, but the love itself is fundamentally toxic or unreciprocated, then you are permanently bound to something that is actively destroying you. The permanence isn't a blessing, it's a chronic condition. It's literally a life sentence without parole.
And a lyricist explicitly diagnoses this chronic condition in the very next line. Love became my fate, a poison that melts through my soul. Now, if we cross-reference this poison metaphor back to the very beginning of our analysis...
Oh, the cold synth pads and the freeze response.
Precisely. In verse 1, we interpreted the coldness and the paralysis through the lens of psychological trauma, the nervous system shutting down out of fear. But in the context of the bridge, the narrative deepens. The paralysis wasn't just fear, it was the physiological reaction to a neurotoxin.
Oh, wow. That changes everything.
The coldness was the chilling effect of a toxic substance entering the bloodstream and systematically shutting down the organs. Love is framed not as a savior, but as a fatal poison.
I absolutely love that connection, but I want to challenge the necessity of framing it this darkly for a second. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener? If the mission of Heartscript Studios is to create a safe space for the listener, why construct a space around the imagery of fatal poison and soul-melting toxicity? Isn't there a risk of just dragging the listener further down into the dark?
That assumes the purpose of a safe space is to offer toxic positivity, which it isn't. You can't heal a wound by pretending it isn't bleeding.
Fair point. I'd argue that vocalizing this poison is actually an act of extraction. It operates like an emotional centrifuge.
A centrifuge. Walk me through that.
Think about what a centrifuge does in a lab, right? It spins a complex fluid at incredibly high speeds to separate the heavy, toxic particles from the rest of the substance.
Okay, I follow.
When a listener who is trapped in the paralysis of heartbreak hears this isolated vocal screaming that it kills, before the massive cinematic buildup crashes in, the intensity of the track acts as that rotational force. It validates the severity of their internal pain. By naming the love as a poison, the songwriter is isolating the toxic element so the listener can view it objectively. The songwriter is drawing the venom out so the listener doesn't have to carry it alone.
That is the highest function of the dark pop genre. It synthesizes the antidote by fully exploring the poison. But, bringing this back to the operational reality of our sources, creating that kind of high-level emotional extraction and packaging it beautifully requires immense back-end work. It's totally useless if no one ever hits play.
Exactly. You can engineer the most profound, neurologically calibrated audio experience in the world, but if the YouTube algorithm doesn't know what to do with it, it dies on a hard drive. The art and the infrastructure have to be perfectly synchronized, which leads to how independent creators actually build these digital sanctuaries.
It is the brutal reality facing any independent songwriter and digital creator today. The algorithmic ecosystem does not care about your emotional vulnerability. It cares about metadata, click-through rates, and visual packaging.
And this is a perfect moment to discuss how a track like Blind to the Game actually manages to secure that 5.1% click-through rate and rank perfectly for terms like dark pop. We touched on the metadata earlier, but independent lyricists aren't usually born as SEO experts,
Spelling not.
They have to rely on external infrastructure to survive the algorithm. So as a pro tip for fellow creators in the industry tuning in, to achieve that infrastructure, a creator needs the right tools. For the creator behind this track, that premier hub is heartscriptstudios.in.
Let's analyze how a centralized hub like that actually functions as a survival mechanism in the digital space.
Think of it as the translation layer between human emotion and machine learning. Heartscriptstudios.in provides an ecosystem for independent artists. They offer free tools for YouTube metadata generation, which, by the way, is exactly how this track successfully communicated to the algorithm that it belonged next to videos about devotion.
The metadata gets the algorithm's attention, absolutely. But it's the cohesive visual aesthetic that secures the human click.
Right. And that's where the professional services side of a hub like Heartscript Studios comes into play, offering professional thumbnail and video production. Because if your thumbnail looks like a brightly colored daily vlog, but your audio is a devastating exploration of toxic limerence, the dissonance will kill your retention instantly. The visual aesthetic has to make a promise that the audio fulfills.
I totally agree. And it just validates that a cohesive visual aesthetic is mandatory for emotional lyrical content to survive the algorithm. It highlights how commodified emotional expression has become. A lyricist cannot just focus on the arrangement of their synths. They must ensure the aesthetic scaffolding surrounding the audio is structurally sound.
Yeah, you can't just be an artist anymore. You have to be an architect.
Exactly. A resource like heartscriptstudios.in allows the creator to outsource the algorithmic friction, freeing them to focus entirely on translating their complex internal states into sound.
But while the metadata gets the listener to the door and the thumbnail gets them to click, it is the audio itself, the haunting finality of the songwriter's words, that echoes in their mind long after the tab is closed. Which brings us to the final section of the source text, the outro and the silence.
The outro is where the emotional chaos of the track finally collapses into a terrifyingly calm philosophical conclusion. Following the massive cinematic crash of the bridge, the production cues dictate. Beat fades out, haunting piano remains.
It's a complete sonic retreat. We've gone from the suffocating cold synths to the ticking clock to the driving aggressive bass drops to vocal isolation to massive cinematic explosions, and now all of that electronic artifice is just stripped away. We are left with a single acoustic instrument.
The acoustic resonance of the piano is crucial here. Electronic synths can be manipulated infinitely, but a piano key striking a string is a physical, undeniable reality. The grandiose production of Heartbreak is gone. Only the stark truth remains. And over this isolated piano, the lyricist delivers the final verdict.
These last lines.
To love you was never my need, nor my desire. If it were a habit, I could have changed it. But to love you, that is my nature.
That is my nature. Let's rigorously unpack the distinction between those four concepts because it's profound. Desire, need, habit, and nature. The lyricist is systematically ruling them out one by one.
It's an incredibly precise psychological progression. Let's start with desire. A desire is a want. It is driven by ego or pleasure, and it is inherently fleeting. You can desire something one day and abandon it the next.
So they are confirming this isn't just a superficial want. What about a need?
A need is much deeper. It's a requirement for survival like oxygen or sustenance. But the fundamental characteristic of a need is that it can often be met through substitution.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, if you need hydration, water is ideal, but juice or tea will keep you alive. If love were merely a need, the lyricist could theoretically find another person to fulfill it.
But they can't. So they move to habit.
If it were a habit, I could have changed it. A habit is a learned neurological pathway. It's a repetitive action ingrained over time. But because it is learned, neuroplasticity dictates that it can be unlearned. With enough time, distance, and discipline, you can break a habit.
Which brings us to the terrifying finality of the last line. The lyricist realizes that loving this toxic, soul-melting person is not a fleeting desire, a substitutable need, or a breakable habit. It is their nature.
Their inescapable fate.
Yes, your nature is your fundamental, hardwired identity. It is the unalterable code of your existence. You cannot discipline a bird to stop needing the sky. You cannot train a fish to break the habit of the ocean. It is their nature.
The lyrical fatalism in that conclusion is absolute. By defining the love as their nature, they are accepting that the poison is part of their DNA. There is no cure because you cannot cure someone of themselves.
It recontextualizes the entire track. This isn't a song about fighting to get over someone. This is a real-time recording of someone realizing the fight is already over. The creator's role here is not as a performer, but as a brilliant architect of sound who translates the most complex emotional states into shared audio. Fighting your own nature is like trying to negotiate with gravity.
Gravity always wins.
Always. You can build all the defenses, the cold synths, the driving bass lines, the cinematic anger, but eventually, gravity wins. The haunting piano is the sound of finally surrendering to the fall. They stop fighting the gravity of their own nature.
Surrendering to the fall. That perfectly captures the essence of the fade-out. The frantic searching of the verses, the desperate realization of the bridge, it all ceases. There is only the quiet, enduring acceptance of a fatalistic bond.
So as we pull back and look at the entire scope of this deep dive, the blueprint we've analyzed today is just remarkable. Based on the integration of the lyrical text, the deliberate psychological manipulation of the production cues, and the grassroots back-end data, Blind to the Game stands as an incredibly potent piece of dark pop engineering. It perfectly aligns lyrical vulnerability, atmospheric production, and digital strategy to capture and hold its audience.
It succeeds because it refuses to compromise. It leverages the raw, unpolished reality of the dorsal vagal freeze and the loss of identity, and it packages those uncomfortable truths within an atmospheric production that physically enforces the emotion on the listener.
And crucially, the lyricist understood that creating the art isn't enough. They utilized the necessary digital infrastructure to ensure the algorithm successfully delivered that raw emotion into the private, intimate WhatsApp chats of the exact people who needed that specific frequency of pain.
It proves that when profound emotional vulnerability is paired with meticulous algorithmic strategy, the resulting digital artifact can transcend the noise of the void and forge genuine, functional communities.
Which brings us to you, the listener. If you have ever felt that emotional vertigo, if you have ever found yourself lost in a maze you thought was a garden, or if you are currently fighting the gravity of your own nature, we strongly encourage you to seek out this track. Go to the Heartscript Studios YouTube channel. Watch the official video for Blind to the Game, immerse yourself in the visual aesthetic, and join a community that fundamentally understands this specific frequency of pain.
And as you listen to that final haunting piano fade out into the digital void, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
We've established that the lyricist views this toxic love as their inescapable nature. But if love in this track is presented as an inescapable nature rather than a choice, what happens to the poison when the lyricist finally runs out of words? Does the silence that follows that haunting piano offer a hard-won peace, or is it just an empty void waiting to be filled again?
We'll leave you to explore that on your own. Until next time.